everyone to our IES webinar, A Day in the Life of an Academic. Today we're joined by Dr. Ben Parks, who is a lecturer in climate resilience in the Department of Civil Engineering and Management at the University of Manchester. His research focus is on mitigating or adapting to the impacts of climate change. Beyond research, Ben teaches sustainability of infrastructure systems to first-year civil engineering students and climate impact analysis to civil, aerospace and electronic engineering fourth-year students. Outside of academia, Ben has been a member of the IES since 2022 and achieved Chartered Environmentalist earlier this year. Today's webinar will provide an overview of Ben's journey into academia and what a standard week looks like. Ben will also discuss the process of becoming a Chartered Environmentalist from an academic perspective and the support that's available. As always, there will be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point throughout this presentation. Thank you for logging in, and I'll now hand over to Ben.
So yes, A Day in the Life. I'm Dr. Ben Parks, lecturer in climate resilience. I'm a full member of the IES and Chartered. There's other letters after my name for various other reasons, but they're not too important. I will also just say, because I'm doing an IES talk, I have got my magnetic Chartered Environmentalist badge on as well, which is a very nice thing to get when you do get chartered. So if we move on to slide 2, one of the fun questions: what is an academic? I'm on a combined teaching and research contract. A few of my colleagues are specialised in either of those directions, but most of us are on the combined role, and we have to switch from one to the other. I run my notes daily, but actually hourly in some cases. We work with other academics, so lecturers, readers, professors, and postdoctoral researchers on research projects, and these can be tiny as a couple of months on an internal project, or something as big as the Large Hadron Collider. That's something that academics do work on. We also write the research projects. We will apply for funding from funding agencies to get money, to hire people to do research onto something new. When I wrote this presentation, I had 3 grants at some stage of review, one of which has been rejected, one of which we've got the reviews back for, and the other one we have gone through into the next stage. And literally last week, I got invited to another research project. Beyond the research things, we also are an early port of call for media about our research topics. Quite often I'll see friends and colleagues quoted in the BBC or having articles in The Guardian. One of my postdocs literally yesterday was talking to a radio station in agriculture in California, because that's where some of his previous work had been. So if we move on from here, the question is, you know what an academic is. Let's get the next slide, Sally. Brilliant, thank you. How do you become an academic? Now, according to my notes, what I should not say is make a series of poor life choices, which is fine, you don't have to. There are multiple paths, and the most common one is the one on the slide here. Some cases, people skip the master's degree and they'll jump straight from undergraduate to PhD. It's only generally possible if you've got a first, and it's a high risk on both sides, because you've not really got your teeth into any research during most undergraduate degrees, not to the depth that you do in a master's. The jump from postdoc to academic can either be via a research fellowship, which is 4 to 5 years on pure research, with the understanding that you'll pick up some teaching towards the end of that contract, or going, and then hopefully you'll get a permanent contract at the end of that research fellowship. However, the number of fellowships that lead to lectureships is dropping. So the other route is direct from postdoctoral researcher, to lecturer. Either way, when you're a lecturer or a research fellow, you're now an academic. There are some other routes which are via industry. We do hire people, and we often have the phrase or equivalent in our hiring practices. Not everyone has a PhD. So there are multiple ways into becoming an academic, and there are lots of ways to do it. Next slide, please. And questions about becoming one. This is the idealized and simplest progression for an academic. For anyone outside of the UK, the terms lecturer and senior lecturer, and to some extent reader, are not common. A lecturer is an assistant professor, and a senior lecturer is an associate professor. There's the term adjunct professor. It's generally below a lecturer level, but it can't be used as a full guide, because literally every university is different, and they're going to have their own titles. This is the simplest and most translatable one within the UK. Now, people can jump steps and move quickly to professor, and you're also not locked in. Some people move out of academia and into the other fields, and then their circumstances change. They can decide if they want to stay out or possibly even return to academia. So the next question with this long progression, if we move on to the next slide, do you have to start young? It's a really simple slide with a really simple message. You don't have to start straight out of your degree and solely pursue academia. We have mature students starting PhDs later in life and then progressing into an academic career. Some of the best academics I know spent time in industry. My advice, if you want to go and get a career first, go for it. Universities will likely be here, and if you do want to come back, the option will be there. It may take some more work, but it can be done. You don't have to start young. And again, if we move on to the next slide, I promise, I realized I'm going at quite a rate. I am excited about this. I enjoy talking about being an academic, so I do talk quite quickly. Well, what else can you do if you have come in and gone out? There's a lot. Academics are specialists in their research area, but they also develop a truly fantastic number of other skills. Anyone who's in the audience who's passed through a degree will hopefully understand the difference between lecturing and teaching. That's not to say that lecturers are not teaching. We are teaching, but the tools and methods are very different. I mean, the differences between your classroom of 30 students, a seminar with 10 people in the room with a small discussion, a lecture theatre where you're trying to project to 400, or even a computer cluster with 50, or a field course with 120. Teaching that number of students in that environment requires a different set of skills every time. And we have to design the sessions such that students do learn something, and the techniques we use do vary. Other things that academics can do is being a consultant. This is when their specialist knowledge is of benefit to a partner in industry. And industry is a catch-all term here. This is charities, it could be government, it could be companies. Some of my colleagues have actually stepped back from academia to become part or even full-time consultants. Beyond that, academics can be pure researchers. There are schemes to fund people for several years on specific research projects. So they step back from their teaching commitments and focus purely on research. Other academics are extremely good with the media and they become an advocate for their field in the wider public. Now, I work for the University of Manchester, so I'm practically contractually obliged now to mention Professor Brian Cox, because he's great at talking to people about science. He's a wonderful science communicator. Beyond the media commitments and the spokespeople, we have support specialists. These are people who work within the university system, but instead of leading on research, they focus on helping other academics with either funding or outreach or dissemination of their research. So what jobs can academics do? The answer to that is practically limitless. You have developed a lot of skills in a specific area, and then you can just spread out into the wider world. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So here, this was my route, and it took a really long time to go around in a circle. It is a long run around a circle from Manchester to Leeds. A couple of times I was there, Paris, and then back to Manchester. But I've had a lot of fun, and I've met and worked with some truly fantastic researchers. I've worked with 2 Nobel Prize winners, people that do regularly appear on the BBC, and people in government ministries. A lot of the cohort from my PhD have stayed in science, so the people who were doing their PhD the same time as me at Leeds. They're now at the Met Office, the government, the Environment Agency, and more universities that you can shake a stick at. They're everywhere. It's great. I've got contacts for all of them. And it means that they also know me. Really the best takeaway I can give you about my journey is it wasn't typical. Not everyone spends time working abroad. I have peers that have started their degree in one university, finished that, done a PhD, finished that, done some postdoctoral research, and have become a lecturer all in one place. I've got colleagues that have jumped across the Atlantic. My journey wasn't typical, that I went round in a circle, but it's not an absurd journey either. So there's a lot of ways to become an academic if you want to. And if you move on to the next slide, what tips and advice would I give a student if you wanted to become an academic? If you're on an undergraduate degree now, and you have the luxury of time to think about an academic career, then I do have a fair few tips. There's a lot of things that you can talk about. Try research. Genuinely get a chance to do it. If you're on a degree that only does 20 to 30 credits of research, it's a very nice way to dip your toe in the water, but a PhD is plunging into the deep end. So you might want to try something that's partway through. So go for a master's, MSc, MA, MRes, they're all perfectly valid things. The PhD is the deep end. When I say they're not easy, I do actually mean that. It can be grim, it can be tough. I think if a PhD goes perfectly well, something's gone wrong. It doesn't happen. You need to be stubborn, possibly even with a certain amount of sheer bloody mindedness. If it goes too well, you'll miss out on that experience of wondering, what am I doing and is it worth it? Now, it was for me, but you'll only find this out by doing it for yourself. A friend of mine who did their PhD in the UK said, if they can talk you out of it, then you shouldn't do it. Now, I think that's possibly a bit too dismissive about PhDs. They didn't have a particularly fun time. But I do recommend only going for a PhD if you really want to go for it. And this is why I have said, try some research first, something like a master's, or if you have the option of doing a longer research project, go for that. Once you're a PhD student or a postdoc, meet people. It sounds really simple to say, but go out and do it. There will be meetings outside of your school and university. Now, one of the things I do say, and it's only slightly tongue-in-cheek, is be the last person standing when the profs think about research. I've had conversations at 11 p.m. after a 9-hour conference day, followed by the conference dinner, and then a walk around an island, and a person sat down next to me and said, so you're the person to talk to about data. And I was, but I got the information and that conversation because I was there to talk to. No, it's not just serendipity, which is what happened there. It's taking the time to talk to people, find out about someone else's work, what they're passionate about. The number of projects that I'm involved with because I had a conversation I didn't know is innumerable. Go out and find someone to talk to them, listen to what they have to say. Beyond that, build some really good transferable skills. Coding a new language. If you've had a chance to learn coding languages as part of an undergraduate degree, great. But practice ones that aren't necessarily available there. Present things. Take minutes at meetings. That could be a really powerful skill. And don't be afraid to get things wrong. If you have a research idea, then do try it. I've burned so many CPU hours on ideas, and of all the ones that have failed, they probably outnumber the ones that have worked by 10 to 1. But the one or twos that do work, they're really good. Well, I found them really good and turned into something interesting. And if you're unsure about a research topic, go speak to an expert. As you're possibly aware, 10, 12 minutes into this presentation, it's not hard to get an academic to start talking. The real art form is shutting us up. If you see a seminar advertised, ask if you can go sit in, just hide at the back and take notes, and you'll be surprised what you can learn. You can generate new ideas there. The last thing I will say is stand out. This is more aimed at people who are trying to jump from postdoc to academic. Anyone who's at the stage of wanting to jump to academic is someone with excellent research. So do something different to stand out. Do some teaching, win some money, to go to win the money to do the research, or even just go to a conference, do something with media, work with industry contacts. Quite often we'll ask this, a PDRA, what is your unique selling point? What are you giving me that the other 10 people that are going to be interviewed don't have? And that's the big jump. And I think when people start thinking like that, they have more success. So if we can go into the next slide. This was actually the pitch that I was sent. What does a day look like for an academic? And any of my colleagues I've talked to about this, we can't answer it. Our days are far too variable, but our weeks are a lot more consistent. So if you flip forward one side, this is what a week looks like for me. Yeah, this genuinely looks familiar. Another word to describe my week this week has been chaos. I teach for 3 hours a week this semester, and a couple of hours for about half a semester too. But beyond that, I've got exams, I've got coursework, which means I've got marking. I have my PhD students, which I meet some of them each week, some of them every other week. And it's about 3 or 4 hours a week I spend just meeting PhD students. I've got undergraduate project students, and I see them for about an hour every other week. And when I don't have undergraduates, I've got master students. The academic advising is the phrase that we use for what a lot of people think of as the tutor group, and I see these for about an hour a week. When I made these notes, I said administrative role. I know you have 2 administrative roles, so they occupy about a day and a half a week, although that does bunch up at certain times. The research projects, I'm on 4 research projects at the moment. There's an EU-funded one on water monitoring with a focus on crops and irrigation. There's a UK-funded project on nitrogen oxide emissions from aircraft in crews, so when there's flying. I've got some consultancy work for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and I've got a small internal funded project on carbon efficient computing. And those combined will hopefully occupy about a day and a half a week. So in all of the other space, I need to write new research bids, such as, well, the 2 under review and the other one under development. I need to try to review papers. I don't know how every editor manages it. I only seem to get asked to review papers while I'm on leave, so I don't get to do it much. I also try to write a paper, although more generally giving feedback to my students and postdocs on their papers. And if possible, plan some new research. This is what happens before writing some bids, and you just need to sit down and think. And then once I've done all of that, I do try to fit in some continual professional development as well. So I realised I ratcheted through this talk very quickly. If we move on to slide 11, next slide, please. How do you become chartered? And for me, how is part of why. At least one friend has told me I need to start with the post-nominal letters, and I think there's 32. That's not why I got chartered. The actual reason I got chartered is because I work in the School of Engineering, and there's an expectation from our external accrediting bodies that 50% of the teaching staff are chartered. Now, I am not an engineer. I'm a physicist and a climate scientist, but I'm very much not an engineer. So becoming a chartered engineer was never going to happen. The external accrediting body for our civil engineering degree recognised that Chartered Environmentalist is a relevant qualification. So that's what I did. I identified the IES and started working within their system to apply for chartership. So I then moved on to doing the Chartered Environmentalist in a day workshop in January 2024. And this, I think, is the point where I ran into the big disconnect between how academics work and how professionals work for going for chartership. I know that the IES have got an awful lot of professionals in. As you saw from the previous couple of slides, I don't do one thing. I do about 20, and I try to unify them, and it's a massive amount of mental gymnastics for it to happen. So I've got on this slide where it says update application. That's a really kind euphemism when I wrote it. What it really means is do a frantic rewrite of my scattered academic projects into a small number of projects that fit into the approach of the IAS. And I ended up splitting it basically into teaching as one major project, because I was teaching about sustainability, and then research when I was actively researching the sustainability. And after the update, I had at least one moment of mild panic and then submitted the application. I had the interview the next day with 2 members of the IES, and I got the feedback a couple of weeks later that I had the certificate, which, if I was in my office, is hanging on that wall. I'm in one of our meeting rooms at the moment, and the very nice magnetic badge. So that's how I did it. It also involves why I did it. And I think I've gone through this in about 15 minutes. So if we go to the last slide. This is my last slide. I was actually asked this. What is the core message in my work? I do come back to this question every now and again. I think we should all do it as academics. My answer generally for this is, what can we do now to make the next 50 years better for the people living through them? And that thought covers my projects, my teaching, my research, honestly, a lot of my outlook on life. My first year students, They're on a course doing sustainable and resilient infrastructure, and they're living with a hangover of decisions made 150 years ago. And I do try to get them to think what decisions they're making today that everyone will be living with for that next 50 to 150 years. And at that point, I'm going to open the floor for questions. I see we've actually got some in the Zoom. That first one, it's fairly loaded. Being an academic can take a heavy toll on your mental health. It's not for everyone. Certainly the process of the PhD it's hard work mentally. How do I keep myself mentally healthy so I don't completely burn out? Set reasonable boundaries and set them early on in your career. And there'll be a point at which you have to decide if those boundaries shift or if the university's opinion shifts. I very rarely work weekends. I have colleagues that do. Beyond that, get yourself into a healthy routine, doing exercise if possible, seeing friends. I will never pretend that a PhD is perfect for your mental health. It's not, it is a struggle. And there are people that stop. And there is a perception, I still find in a lot of our students that even if they're miserable, they should plow through. And I don't necessarily agree with it. The days of people saying, toughen up, are long gone. And they should stay long gone. Beyond that, a lot of universities recognise the stress levels that academics are under, and there are schemes. I know that we have one at the University of Manchester for students. We have another one for staff, that you can talk to people if you're struggling with your mental health. I have been very lucky with my managers in my career, that I've always had fairly understanding ones, and that helps, but I can't really give any more information than that. So I hope that's given a reasonable answer. I don't want to put you off. I'm just going to, but I also don't want to deceive you into thinking it's easy and sunshine and rainbows. It's not all the time. Sometimes it's tough, but it's also worth it. As an academic, the one thing I didn't mention is I have a fantastic amount of freedom. Within the realms of what my course content is, I can teach how I want. As long as I hit the learning objectives of the unit, I can teach what I want. My research topics are climate resilience. I have recently had papers published on aircraft emissions, on crop yields, on what's the other one that has been done recently? There's been ones on heat stress. It's a wide array. So find what you're passionate about and go to that. Onto the question from Jacob. Is there anything that inspired me to become an academic in the first place that made you think it was suitable? I'll answer this one actually by saying, no, I wasn't really ever sort of inspired to become an academic. It always seemed like a good idea. I did not apply for a PhD until fairly late after I'd finished my degree and realised that I actually was eligible to do them. And then once I was in the academic field, I did not feel that I wanted to leave. A few really good lecturers, I say, also part of it. And they're not necessarily the superstars, but they're the ones that teach and care. I actually do mention Brian Cox a lot at this point. He taught me in my fourth year, and it's probably one of my favourite memories of being an undergraduate student is that he took the time in that lecture course to tell us about research level content that was beyond what was ever going to be on the exam. He talked about charge parity violation and why there is mass in the universe. In all honesty, I've forgotten the content he taught that I was examined on, but I remember that bit because you could see that moment when he lit up and got excited about it. And those moments, the ones that I now treasure, and I'm very lucky that I get to have a couple of those each year talking to my fourth year students. It was last week. I basically got to spend 20 minutes nerding out, is the only way I can describe it, about research topics. And if one student in the room is inspired by that, that's probably the best way I could say that it struck me. What was the hardest research project that I've worked on, if there is one? Ooh. At the time, the PhD felt the hardest, but I also, when I got to the end of it, realised that I could actually redo all of that work in 6 months because most of it was learning how to do the project. In terms of technical skills displayed, I think possibly a recent project on heat stress where I had to do an awful lot of pretty impressive within my own scope, not by the scope of real coders, coding and scripting to make the plots that we wanted to display the results we were after. It was quite an innovative approach. And I also will have to shout out the reviewer for that paper who made a really good suggestion. It's not always the case. So I would say those are probably that was possibly the hardest in terms of skill level. The hardest in terms of learning new knowledge was the PhD, when I had to stop being an undergraduate and start being a PhD student. That change in mentality took time. I've been asked when I'm doing research project, do I have a lot of time to go into the field and do field work? I am not a fieldwork scientist. The last time I went out in fieldwork, I was 18 months into my PhD and got rained on the Scottish island of Arran, and went, that's enough for me. I do all of my research behind a computer. That being said, I have a lot of colleagues that do research that involves fieldwork. It can be done. So it all depends on the research project that you're on. If you've applied for a PhD, it's got research that's got fieldwork in. Fantastic. If not, sometimes you can add some research, some fieldwork onto a project. It all does depend on the project that you're on. How do I deal with criticisms or rejection during my work? Sometimes with rude words. It depends on what the criticisms are. If someone's criticizing the scientific approach, I need to go back and see if I can make it better. I do try to give people the benefit of the doubt when I get a rejection. See, well, what can I do to get this into their head with more effectively? There are certain phrases that academics use when we write a response to a reviewer. One of the ones that is a common one, which is to enhance clarity, which means, have you read the document? So sometimes it's just grumbling with colleagues in a coffee, having a coffee. Other times you just go, okay, that one I'm going to put down and I'll deal with later. There are very few projects that completely disappear, and sometimes you just have to take the loss, accept that you're not going to get it, and pick up and try again with something else. It does require a lot of mental resilience, and the rejections for grants are more common than the acceptances, so you have to be aware that's going to happen. You are only ever going to set yourself up for emotional torment if you write every grant expecting it to be funded. You may be the superstar that gets every grant funded. I'm not. I write every grant going, okay, the acceptance rate in this call is about 10%. I've got a 1 in 10 chance at best. And you do with that. That's for research projects. When it comes to paper reviews, I tend to actually put the review down and come back to it the next day with a clear mind, and then look what the reviewer has said. And I find a very effective tool is actually cutting their comments down into smaller things that can be answered. If you have this huge wall of text that's saying lots of difficult things, it becomes a problem to respond. But if you cut it into individual sentences or small paragraphs, you can then attack each individual comment. And that then means you've got space to respond to the reviewer and improve the work. Is there a research project that I really want to work on? Yes, dozens of them. Any of the ones that I've got in that I'm trying to get funded at the moment. So there are ones for, I don't necessarily want to mention them all entirely online. There's one that is now under review with a research agency, at least I can mention it, it's passing on space debris. There are projects that I want to work on climate change and its impacts on health, specifically on heat stress. There's a very nerdy topic that at some point I want to realistically supervise on bias correction methods of climate data outputs and the path dependence of that. And those are just ones off the top of my head. I have meetings every week with people where we discuss potential research projects, and you come out of every single one of them going, that would be fun. I wonder if I've got the time. I've also got a couple of PhD projects that I'm trying to finish off writing down to then get people to put out into the world to see if we get someone to come in and do things on. Let's see which ones we've got. Carbon capture and storage in the urban areas, things on rainfall data sets and what we can do with them. So those are a couple of the research projects that I'd like to work on. And part of me, because I did do a physics degree, I would love to do some work on the LHC, but I am completely unsuited. So as much as it would be fun, I would not be able to contribute anything useful. So I don't think I'm going to be getting onto that. Oh, another question. What's the best part of being an academic? There's a few I think are really good parts. I don't want to just highlight one. I really enjoy graduation. I really enjoy getting to celebrate the students and their successes. I think it's important. It's something that maybe not everyone agrees with, but I think it's one of the most enjoyable days of being an academic. Similarly, we have the poster session for our students for our third years, and we have that on one day in the School of Engineering for civil and mech and aero. And it's a wonderful time to see what all of these students have been working on, some of which you've not interacted with before, for the last several months, and it's a great chance to see what they're doing. So in the teaching side of academia, those are some of the really big highlights. In terms of the research, the freedom. There are very few jobs as open to what you can do as being an academic. I can decide that today I intend to spend an hour or two of my time reading on a couple of topics that are tangentially related to what I've done, sending a couple of emails to people who know what they're on about, saying, can we do some research on this? Very few other places give you that sort of space to just be interested in the world. I think that's one of the things that is often missed about being an academic. Have you got any more questions?
I have a question, Ben.
Sure.
If you could pick one piece of advice for a student looking to get into academia, maybe they're an undergraduate now, what would it be?
The one piece of advice, depending on your stage, if you've got the chance before doing a undergraduate research project, so generally people do a large project in their third year, and you may have the chance to speak to people during your second year about it. Go talk to lots of academics about potential research project ideas, because the first step in becoming an academic is almost always going through the research step of a PhD. So if you are an undergraduate who is interested in doing a PhD, go talk to academics and ask about research with them, about doing a project with them, especially if you've got something you're interested in. If you are beyond that stage and you're in your third year or you're in the fourth year of an integrated master's, speak to people, look at potential PhD projects, or look at MScs or MAs or MReses. Get the research down, because if you enjoy the research, it becomes a lot easier then to head towards an academic career.
Thanks, Ben. Just kind of bouncing off that, you've spoken a lot about working with a load of different people, doing different things all the time. And you've just kind of covered it there as well with your advice, but how important would you say networking is and building that network as an academic? Would you say that's a really important part of the job, or?
It's a fantastically important part of the job. Going out and meeting people is half the point of going to a conference. Some of the most fun events I've been to, I was at a conference in San Francisco. This is actually pre-pandemic, and someone who was walking around to the conference center, I knew their name. I knew the work that they'd done. And I hadn't touched the topic that they were researching for 4 or 5 years at that point. But as soon as they saw my name badge, they went, I know who you are. Because they'd seen my research, and they said, okay, I'm going to talk to you for a bit, and then we would meet somebody else. One of my most recent research papers on heat stress came around because the person who I was sharing a house with at the time had met the person who became my co-author at a training course when they were both in Italy. Neither of them were Italian, but they'd gone to a training course together, and then they had that network, and they could say, oh, Ben Parks would like to meet you. And it was that ability to just move over to the next point. I think we've got another one that's just dropped into the chat. Can undergraduates attend conferences? Ostensibly, yes, it depends on the conference. So things such as the one I mentioned in San Francisco, the American Geosciences Union General Meeting, the requirement is to be a member of the American Geosciences Union and then to pay the fee. There are some student fees which are lower than they are for academics, but it's an expensive thing to go to San Francisco. If you're going to something more local, like a national level conference, if you are invited, you can attend. And if it is an open call to the public, you can attend. You can email the conference organizers and say, I am an undergraduate in topic X from University Y. I would like to attend this conference as part of this. Can you explain to me how it would be possible to apply? And then realistically, the limiting factor is the entry fee. Now, some conferences have very low entry fees or have ones that are specifically aimed at students. They tend to be a little bit more aimed at postgraduates, but I don't see any real academic reason why you could not. The one that I will say is going to be limiting is the financial reason. Because if we have the entire cohort wanting to go to a conference, that's very expensive.
I suppose just to like pair with that and the previous question, what would your advice be to build that network? Obviously, we've spoken about conferences, but there must be other ways as well to kind of get to know people and get your name out there, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, lots of ways to do it. The conference is a very easy one. Sitting down in the coffee mornings. Hopefully, if you are a research student, there are people going into the office and you can sit down and meet them. There are large meetings. There are also a lot of institutes that do student-focused events for networking. There are networking skills training courses that can give you far more information about how to do it than I'm going to be able to articulate here. It's smile, say hello to someone in the corridor. Genuinely, I've got a research project that we are writing that happened because I spoke to a person in a stairwell in a building because we were moving out of it. It can be as simple as going, hi, how are you? What's your work on?
Thanks, Ben.
I've just realised that genuinely is how that happens. There are other ones. I'm a big fan of coffee room science. We just sit in the coffee, sit down in the common rooms and talk to someone, and suddenly a project happens. My PhD that I did N years ago was the result of two scientists, not from the same institute, happening to be in the same room and having a conversation. And that spawned multiple research projects, one of which was my PhD. I think we've got another one. How is it best to engage the academic community to help answer industry questions? Ooh. No, I have to say this is not my strong suit. I would say if you know a specific academic, you can go to them directly. If you don't know someone, then you can talk to a local or even a non-local university, and they will generally have some form of business engagement team, or they may name the business engagement officer. They will be the people who can give you that first answer. Hopefully in business, you'll have some idea of the research topics you want to talk to people about, but the university should have a functioning business engagement team. I know that Manchester do, and if you want to drop me an email later, I can put you in contact with ours.
I think that might be all we have time for today, but thank you very much once again, Ben, for presenting. That was really insightful and I found it really interesting. Attendees, thank you for logging in. I really hope that you found that beneficial and informative. The webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the IES website and on our YouTube channel. So if you are watching the recording on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, like the video and hit the bell to gain notifications of any new content that we post. You can also watch other videos in our Day in the Life series if that was something that you're interested in. They're all over on our YouTube channel. Thank you again, Ben, and all attendees. Thank you for watching.